Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Just Read It. Okay,
I'm C.
And I'm Kay.
and here we are getting back into our Court of Mist and Fury review. But before we do, we're going to jump in and talk about some current literary fun. And then today we will be covering chapters 17 through 22. Let's get into it.
What are you reading right now?
Right now, I am in the middle of the fourth book in Chelsea Curto's DC Stars series, a hockey romance series. Not my first, but super, super powerful. The emotion behind it is more than you find in quite a few of the standard sports romance, where it kind of follows similar tropes. I like the grounding human aspect of all four books that I've been into.
Nice.
What about
I have not read anything other than ACOTAR in the last week and a half. It's been so terrible. We've just been so busy and I haven't had time. Ugh, it's terrible. But I did watch the new off-campus show based on the books by Elle Kennedy. Of course, it's fantastic. I absolutely love it. I am definitely digging into the book versus TV show aspects of it because that's just who I am. And of course, I read all of the books 2 years ago and again earlier this year before her newest book came out in May, before I got to go see her, which was super awesome to get to meet her in person. But it is super similar to the books, not spot on, but I think they did a really good job of picking an actor and an actress as the two main characters for the season that really bring out the characters in the book. Like, I feel like those pair is perfect to play those characters. And I'm not thrilled with all of the actors they chose. I think later on in the seasons to come, we'll see how it turns out, whether I continue to dislike or like them. But at this point, I'd just like to be a fly on the wall in that hockey house.
right?
Because whether it's Garrett and Hannah or Dean and Allie, I'm just like, it's perfect. It's just perfect.
I mean,
Kay, you need to get on this off-campus boat. You need to get on the
really
boat.
do.
I'll get around to it. I have so many right now on my TBR that I'm trying to get through.
What are
I'm not
you
really
reading
watching
right now?
anything. Yeah, I'm not really watching anything. I'm reading. So I tried to get into Hunting Adeline because I just finished the first one. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and hop into the second one. And I just could not get into it. I listened to it.
Ugh.
Yeah, and it's not that it's bad. Maybe I'm mood reading. I've never mood read before.
Oh,
But I think it may be happening. I was like, I need something light. So Christy Boyce, her new book, Roles and Rivalry, just
Yes.
came out. So I started that one. And it's cute. I needed something light. So maybe I can try Hunting Adeline afterwards. But I think this is what I need right now. Especially after ACOMAF. I don't need another heavy
Right?
book right now.
I will say I am listening to one of my rereads to help me fall asleep, which sounds terrible, but it's not like boring. That's not why I'm listening to it. It's just like my comfort and it helps relax me, but it is a Mariana Zapata book and it is called Hands Down, and it is also a sports romance. Because I just love them all.
Before you, I don't think I had ever read a sports romance that I actually clicked with. And now the off-campus series, I was so obsessed with them. I bought them within a week of reading them. Well, within a week of reading the first, I bought 9 of the 14 that were out, maybe 15 now. I
Wow.
can't remember the exact number, but I bought 9 with only reading the first
Yeah,
one.
we're at 14. 14
So,
right now.
yeah, it's insane. And then I went and purchased the Liz Tom 40 ones because he had mentioned those, and they were
Ugh.
absolutely incredible in a
Are
different
they
way.
long reads?
No,
Not
No.
the Elle Kennedy ones. No, the Windy
no.
City series is a little longer.
A little bit, but not by much. And I will tell you, if you start with the Windy series, the other ones might be not a letdown, but just not quite on her level of writing. Like, all of her books are just a notch above all other sports romance that I've read.
I would concur. I'd say start with The Deal. Not that it's not as incredible as the Windy City series, but The Deal has a lot more of the cute, like the comforting.
It's college.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
not so much
That is
real
all
adult life out of
college.
school.
Yes, whereas the Windy City series, that is all professional. So that might be the difference between the two.
That actually makes a lot of sense thinking about it that way, because the Chelsea Curto series, it's NHL as well, but it's very focused on, not that the other two don't have a lot of female empowerment, but this one is really focused on female empowerment in the NHL. like breaking glass ceilings. So you have that underlying tone too, which I love in the fact that being able
You
to
do.
move up any sort of corporate ladder. I'm like, oh my gosh, let's read that. So yeah.
Awesome. I love it. All right. Anything else we want to talk about before we jump in? Because we got a ton of fun stuff in this set of chapters. I am so excited. One of my favorite parts in potentially the whole series, which I say that and there are like 30 favorite parts for me. But one of my favorite parts happens when they are getting ready to go see the Weaver. So, all right, let's get into it.
Let's go.
In this set of chapters, we have obviously we're still in the Night Court. We're in the Night Court pretty much for the rest of this book. We're going to bounce around a little bit, visit some new places, try some new things. But for the most part, Feyre is officially in the Night Court working with Rhysand and his inner circle. So we met his inner circle, which I love. I love last time we talked about all the connections that she already has with most of the people in the inner circle. In this set of chapters, we are going to get a little bit more connection between her and some of those in the circle. We also obviously get some more banter in between Rhys and Feyre, which we all love. And we get some new areas and new characters. Lots of new information, some history information that we get, and some kind of deep dives into the backgrounds of different characters. So let's get into it. We ended last episode talking about the possibility that Jerian was going to be resurrected and that Rhysand is going to take Feyre into the prison to see the bone carver to get more answers or to get confirmations to what they think are their answers. So we have Rhysand flying Feyre back over the city, which I love every time that he flies her, especially in this set of chapters because I was just listening to it in the car. At the end of this set of chapters, he just like falls out of a window with her. Just like this. That is awesome. For somebody who loves roller coasters, especially the ones that just drop straight down, like my dream is flying. That is my superpower that I want is to fly. So please, Rhysand, just come fall out a window with me.
And I love when they're flying too. There's always some sort of, if it's banter or some sort of deeply intimate conversation of, hey, I'm going to bare my soul, or I'm going to share just this small, small sliver of who I am and why I am the way I am. Comes out from one of them. And it's not always her. It's not always him. And it keeps you guessing too as you go through it.
Yeah, it's a little back and forth, and it's like they're in their own little world, flying together up above the city. And I think Feyre said that in the last one. She was so high up and felt removed from the world enough that she could start opening up to Rhysand. So I think that ties into it a little bit as well. Okay, so they make it back to the house. And they're kind of talking a little bit in regards to what happened when she met the inner circle at dinner. And they're discussing the bond because Feyre feels him again at one point during the dinner. And Rhysand is kind of like, he's not looking at her when he says this. So if you read between the lines, it's kind of like there's something about the bond that he's not telling her. That's the sense that we get every time he talks about it. He gives her more information in regards to a bond, but we're not quite sure what it means or what he's leaving out at this point. So he does tell her that the bond is a living thing, is how he is describing it. An open channel between us, shaped by my powers, shaped by what you needed when we made the bargain. And she's like, well, I needed to not die. And his response is, no, you needed to not be alone. So he goes on to say, I'm still learning how and why we can sometimes feel things the other doesn't want known. So I don't have an explanation for what you felt tonight. He's dropping little hints, or he's trying to avoid talking about it, that the bond is more than just the bargain that's between them, which we learn later in the book that it is a lot more than what they bargained for. And then Feyre brings up, you let Amarantha and the entire world think you rule and delight in a court of nightmares, and it's all a front to keep what matters most safe. So it's Feyre has finally, she's thought this about Rhysand for a while now, even since Under the Mountain, but now she's kind of confirming that it is a mask that he puts on to be the High Lord of the Night Court, to be ruthless. And his response is, well, yeah, I love my people. I love my family. Do not think I wouldn't become a monster to keep them protected. And her response is, well, you already did that Under the Mountain. And he says, and I will keep doing it to keep my people safe and free. we get Rhysand's continued devotion to his people and to those he cares for. What I love about that is that is something that Feyre mirrors, and they kind of mirror it off of each other, because Feyre is all about protecting those she loves and cares for, and she doesn't care, just like Rhysand, what she has to do to keep them protected. Obviously, she asks, what cost did you do that? And he says, well, you already know. It was to be as close to Amarantha as he possibly could, to make sure that no information passed through or around her that didn't go through him first, to make sure he was able to protect Velaris. And we get a lot more into his description of it. When she tricked them, took all the powers, he still had more powers than the other ones did. And he made the choice when all of that was happening, when Amarantha was taking their powers and they were realizing it. He made the choice to save only Velaris, because he only had enough time to focus on one city. So he essentially decided to use what little power he had left to tap into the mind of every Night Court citizen that she had captured, and anyone who might know the truth. I made a web between all of them, actively controlling their minds every second of every day, every decade, to forget about Velaris, to forget about Mor, Amren, Cassian, and Azriel. It's another testament to how powerful Rhysand really is to start with, because if his powers were reduced the same amount that the rest of the High Lords were, obviously that would still leave him with a ton of power, and even reduced, he is able to do this, which is crazy. So then obviously he said his true court was here ruling the city, and the others, I use the remainder of my power to shield them from sight and sound. And what I think is really cool about this, because we've talked about it multiple times before, he says there's only enough for one city, and I chose the one that had already been hidden in history. I chose, and now I must live with the consequences of knowing there were more left outside who suffered. And this is what I love, because he says anyone flying or traveling near Velaris would see nothing but barren rock. And if you tried to walk through it, they'd find themselves suddenly deciding otherwise. Sea travel and merchant trading were halted. Sailors became farmers, working the earth around Velaris instead, which I think goes to show even more that Rhysand is the type of High Lord that is working always to improve his court and his people, where we saw the opposite with Tamlin and the Spring Court. And the only thing outside of Velaris and his court that he was able to actually keep hidden about himself were his wings, because no one remembered under the mountain that he had wings. After he talks about all of that and just kind of reiterates it with her, she's like, well, it's a shame that others in Prythian don't know. It's a shame that you let them think the worst. And his response is, as long as the people who matter the most know the truth, I don't care about the rest. Period. That's just how it is. Then Feyre has a dream, and this is the first dream that she has now that she is in the Night Court. And it is such a different response to the dream than what she is used to from the Spring Court. So the dream itself is very similar to what she has had in the past. She is essentially naked, being tortured by Amarantha, and Amarantha's telling her, you're just as much of a monster as I am. And I love in the dream that she says, someone far away was roaring my name, begging for me, which I think is very similar to how things ended in book 1, with Amarantha torturing her and Rhys being that voice screaming in the background for her. So I feel like the dream is just reoccurring of what actually happened. But it is actually Rhysand in real life trying to wake her up because she is having a nightmare. Eventually, he is in her room trying to shake her awake. And she says, the voice was at once the night and the dawn and the stars and the earth, and every inch of my body calmed at the primal dominance in it. So I think it's her body's reaction to him, and not the command in the sense that he's her High Lord and is commanding her to wake, but just in the command that he is for her benefit trying to wake her up, and her body recognizes that and calms, and she opens her eyes. She has completely shredded and ripped her sheets. She looks down, and her fingers are ending in shimmering embers, living claws of flame that had sliced through my bed linens like they were cauterizing wounds. She gets up and immediately has to go throw up in the bathroom, but Rhysand goes with her, holds her hair up like a good boyfriend would, holds her hair out of the way as she throws up multiple times into the toilet. He's telling her to breathe. He's telling her how to get her fingers, her like fire fingers, to go away. He's coaching her through making them wink out one by one like candles. He's rubbing her back to help calm her down. And then when she finally calms down a little bit, he gives her a piece of him and says, I have this dream where it's not me under Amarantha, but it's Cassian or Azriel, and she's pinned their wings to the bed with spikes, and there's nothing I can do to stop it because she's commanded me to watch. So in that nightmare that he has, it is the worst thing imaginable to him, but now it's going a step further and doing it to one of the people he cares about the most. So he's giving a little bit of himself to her in her vulnerable moment, and he thinks in that type of dream that he has failed them. That's what he recognizes that dream as. And she says, well, you've never failed them. And his response is, I did horrible things to ensure that. So again, we have some mirrored aspects between the two of them because she has also done horrible things in her mind to protect those she loves. But she does end up dreaming again later in this section of chapters, and she doesn't wake up and throw up. She actually gets to a point where she remains calm enough to finish sleeping through the night and doesn't have to throw up. So progression, we see clear progression with her.
I was gonna say, I tend to wonder, and go with me if I'm far-fetched on this one, but if the Autumn Court's powers are another indication from Throne of Glass Pass, because the way she described the ash feeling in her mouth was almost a word by word description of when Aelin had burned herself out, and she was talking about the ash in her mouth and
Ooh.
the smokiness. Just a small one, and I don't know if it's too far-fetched or not, but if you think about her falling through the world and everything we see, it made me wonder, is an Autumn Court another tie that we see, the powers being handed down or powers going through the universes?
Right. It's a good point. There are quite a few things that are similar, or I don't know if it's similar in the sense that they would be in multiple worlds across the Massverse, or if it's just the writing, how Sarah writes them, that
How
they
she
sound
phrases that.
familiar to us. So yeah, that's where I think it's hard to tell the difference. But that's a good point.
And we also did such a deep dive when I was reading Throne of Glass the first that I'm sure you have it in my head from everything we
Just
went through, all of the stuff we pointed out, which, yeah, I get hung up
I
every couple
have
pages on that.
at least 2 references to it in this set of chapters, not including that one, I think. So there will be more. There will be more. But yeah, don't worry.
Okay. I'm glad my mind's not the only one that's going that direction.
Oh no, nope. Mine's there too. We do get Feyre and Rhysand preparing to go to the prison. They get all decked out in knives, swords, everything, or Illyrian fighting leathers. Like they're ready to go into battle to go to the prison. And then they get there, and Feyre realizes the prison is underground and she can't do it. She tries to take a step and isn't able to. She's just not recovered enough to go under a mountain again. All she says is please to Rhysand, and he immediately winnows them right back out. Well, the rest of the day, Feyre stays in bed. She is obviously upset because she couldn't do it, and she feels a little bit like she failed on her first day of work, which I think is pretty funny that, this is her job essentially for Rhysand, and she feels like she failed her first day. And then, yes, she wakes up the next morning, and Amren is standing at the foot of her bed. She is a little worried at first because she didn't hear her come in, didn't hear the door open or close. Like, did Amren just appear? Nobody knows because Feyre just woke up and she was there. So Amren tosses a gold amulet of pearl and cloudy blue stone onto the bed and says, this got me out of the prison, wear it in, and they can never keep you. So she's essentially offering for Feyre to borrow a bracelet that Amren claims got her out of the prison, which just cracks me up because clearly Amren is the type, and I think we get this with a lot of the characters in Rhys's inner circle, including Rhys. They have all been through a ton. They've learned a lot, and they're going to do whatever it takes to get to where they need to go and make sure that their court and their families are safe. So I think it's funny because it's a lie. We don't know yet, but obviously a bracelet doesn't do squat. But Amren tells her that it does to give her the courage to go under. And no matter what, she's going to be able to come back out. So we don't know yet that the bracelet doesn't actually work. But I think it's really funny that Amren is just doing what she has to make Feyre get it done, to get it done. And it's a very reoccurring theme that we see throughout these chapters and then throughout the rest of the book as well. Amren is very specific in the sense that she can borrow the bracelet, but she better bring it back to her. If not, Amren is going to do very nasty things to her, which is right on track with what Rhysand told Feyre. Like, don't steal any jewels from Amren because she's essentially a fire drake and she will hurt you badly. And I love that when Rhys and Feyre finally go that day to the prison, Rhys keeps looking at it. And Feyre's like, what? What are you looking at? His response is, she gave that to you? Like, he is absolutely shocked. We find out later why, that like this has never happened before. And it is an actual piece of jewelry that Sand gave to Amren. So like he recognizes it. And that's why he's trying to figure it out. But yeah, I love the whole thing because it cracks me up. So they finally make it back to the prison. And this time Feyre does go in. So we get a lot of information in regards to what the prison is. It is an island in the heart of the Western Isles, or the most northern part of the continent of Prythian. And the prison is one of the islands in the center of it. It is nothing but rock and grass and mist and sea. It's freezing, deserted, barren, not really a nice, fun place to be. The rock is the prison, and inside it are the foulest, most dangerous creatures and criminals you can imagine. It was made before the High Lords existed, before Prythian was Prythian. Some of the inmates remember those days, remember a time when it was Mor's family, not mine, that ruled the North, which I think is really interesting because we did get at the dinner in the last couple chapters that Mor is the only like actual pure blood, like royalty, what we would consider royalty, whereas Rhysand isn't. So it just makes me wonder about Mor's family, where they came from, because they've clearly been there longer than whatever part of Rhysand's family he's talking about. Mor's family has been there longer. It mentions the prison was there before Prythian, and it only mentions that Mor's family ruled the North, not necessarily that they ruled the Night Court. So it makes me wonder if back then the territories were broken up differently. I don't know. We get a little bit more information on Amren. Feyre asks why Amren won't go back in, and Rhys says because she was once a prisoner here, but not in the body she currently inhabits. So in a different form, she was a prisoner in the prison. The prison itself is like land unto its own. It doesn't technically belong to any of the High Lords since it predates Prythian and the High Lords. But because of where it's located, Rhysand, as the High Lord of the Night Court, is kind of in charge of it. The gates and all the doors are keyed to his blood, so only he can enter, or those he allow can enter. Feyre gets a lot of directions on what to do while near the prison, while in the prison, while talking to the bone carver, like a long list of things she shouldn't do. Essentially, the inmates have nothing better to do than listen through earth and rock for gossip, and they'll sell any bit of information for food, sex, maybe a breath of air. As they're walking up the mountain, Rhysand pulls out a sword. He holds that in one hand and he holds Feyre's hand with the other. Feyre thinks it's pretty funny because she's never actually seen him hold a sword, and his response is, well, Cassian would be annoyed and laugh himself hoarse if he heard you say that, and then make me go into a sparring ring with him. And Feyre asks, can Cassian beat you? And Rhysand's response is, in hand-to-hand combat, yes. He'd have to earn it for a change, but he'd win. And I love that Feyre points out that this is not arrogance or pride in how he speaks about Cassian. It's just truth. Cassian is the best warrior I've encountered in any court, any lands. He leads my armies because of it. We do get a quick little chunk of Asriel's backstory, that he is a bastard, which we know. His father was just mean. And his father had 2 legitimate sons with his wife. They were both older than Asriel, both cruel, and spoiled. So they essentially tormented Azrael for the first 11 years of his life. Azrael was locked in a dungeon cell with no window, no light. He was only allowed out for an hour every day. He was only allowed to see his mom for an hour every week. So until he was brought to the Illyrian camps to train as an Illyrian warrior, he was essentially locked up for the first 11 years of his life. And it was at one point when his brothers burned him to see what happened when you mix an Illyrian's quick healing gifts with oil and fire, and that they weren't able to, the warriors who heard Azrael scream, they weren't able to get there fast enough to save his hands. But eventually, Rhys, Azrael, Cassian all hunted down his brothers and punished them very brutally. Feyre, she's asking questions to keep her mind off of the prison and the fact that they're about to go underground. So she does ask about Mor as well. And Rhysand says Mor is who I'll call when the armies fail and Cassian and Azrael are both dead. So at this point, we have zero idea what her magic is. We're not going to talk about it now because that's a whole other thing that we'll go into later on in the book. But he does say that Mor is his third, and as his third, she is his court overseer. She looks after the dynamics between the Court of Nightmares and the Court of Dreams, and runs both Velaris and the Hewn City. I suppose in the mortal realm, she might be considered a queen, which we do get a hint of that at the beginning of this book when Feyre is overhearing them talk, and Rhysand is telling her, I gave you control over them for a reason. That's where we hint at that she is in charge of the Hewn City as well. And then, of course, Feyre asks about Amren, and Rhysand says her duties as my second make her my political advisor, walking library, and doer of my dirty work. So she's like the little assassin, which I love because she's so petite. It's perfect. He does say I appointed her upon gaining my throne, but she was my ally, maybe my friend, long before that. So Amren and Rhys had a friendship long before he actually became High Lord and appointed her as his second. And we don't know why yet. It is because he was so powerful. He needed someone to train him. And Amren was the only thing close enough in power to him that she is actually the one who helped him train his powers and overcome how powerful he is, that kind of thing. So following along the lines of what Rhysand was saying, Feyre says, so in a war where your armies fail and Cassian and Azrael are dead and even Mor is gone, what happens? And Rhysand says, if that day comes, I'll find a way to break the spell on Amren and unleash her on the world and ask her to end me first. Foreshadowing so much. It just gives me chills too. And of course, then Feyre wants to know, well, what is she? And Rhysand's response is something else, something worse than us. And if she ever finds a way to shed her prison of bone and flesh, Cauldron save us all. So she is like crazy, powerful monster. At this point, they make it to a bald-faced rock, and Pharaoh's like, I can't climb that. And Rhys is like, you don't have to, and puts his hand on it, and it opens up a giant gate. And the gate is made of bone, which is going to be a reoccurring thing in the prison. So they go down and down and down, and like they just keep going down into the mountain. Rhysand tells Feyre, because she asks, where are the guards? There's nobody here. It's completely silent. And he says they dwell within the rock and they only come out for feeding time or to deal with restless prisoners. So then Feyre's response to that is, I tried not to look too long at the walls, especially when they were so rough-hewn that the jagged bits could have been a nose or a brow or a set of sneering lips. Like, that just cracks me up. She's like, okay, I'm not going to look at the walls then. If there are people in them, that's weird. Rhys also says in regards to the prison that he could not free anyone in the prison, even though it is part of his jurisdiction. Once a sentence is given and a prisoner passes those gates, they belong to the prison. It will never let them out. So I take sentencing people here very, very seriously. Feyre starts to ask if he's ever actually had to do that. He says yes and then cuts her off because the walls have ears, which is going to be my first reference to Throne of Glass. Because as they're going through the Fey Forest, they talk about the trees having ears. But they also talk about that in Lord of the Rings. So I don't necessarily think I think it's just the the fact that people can hear, or the people in the prison have learned to hear through the walls. Feyre does mention that the people she can sense, or the beings she can sense on the other side of the wall in all of the cells, were ancient and cruel in a way I had never known, not even with Amarantha. So, like, right now, Amarantha is the worst she's ever seen and had to deal with. And I mean, obviously, these creatures are a lot worse than her. They were infinite and patient and had learned the language of darkness in stone. So then Feyre asks how long was Amren in here. She doesn't actually say her name because we can't speak her name while in the prison, just in case the prison remembers that she's no longer there. So Rhysand tells her that Azriel looked once, and he had to go back into the archives in the oldest temples and libraries, and all he could find was a vague mention that she went in before Prythian was split into courts. So again, before Prythian was Prythian, and emerged once they had been established. Her imprisonment predates our written word, so I don't know how long she was in here, but a few millennia is probably a fair guess. So Feyre was like, well, why haven't you asked? And I mean, one, who would actually ask Amren how long she's been alive or how long she's been in the prison? Like, no, that just sounds like a bad idea. But Rhysand's response is, well, if she deems it's important information, she'll tell me. Until then, I'm not asking. And then again, I'm going to reference Throne of Glass once more because we have information on legends in this world saying that at one point, when the world was born, there were ripples in the fabric of realms, which we know was also the case in Throne of Glass. And that in the chaos of the forming, as the world was forming, creatures from other worlds could walk through one of those rips, enter another world, but those rips closed on their own, and some of those creatures could be trapped, which is also something we see in Throne of Glass and some of the gods who had been trapped in that world. So definitely a similar theme in regards to there are multiple worlds. Sometimes you can walk to a different world and sometimes you can get trapped. And that's going to carry over even more into Crescent City and her third final world or series. So Rhysand does go on to say, I think Amren was one of a kind. I think there are multiple people or multiple beings in the prison who are one of a kind. And he says the Suriel that we saw in for the first book, even they have numbers, even though they're small, they at least have a group of people that live here. Whereas some of those in the prison, he thinks came from somewhere else, and they have been looking for a way home for a long time, which I think is a little bit of foreshadowing, not just for this series, but it ties into Throne of Glass, and I think it foreshadows a little bit into Crescent City as well. Okay, so they continue going down. The bone carver is caged beneath the roots of the mountain, so they have gone past the bottom of the mountain and into the roots. Feyre starts asking for the first time about the bone carver, and she asks, who is he? What is he? Rhysand responds, no one knows, but he will show up as he wants to appear. And Feyre's like, oh, okay, so he's a shapeshifter. Rhysand is like, yes and no. He's going to appear to you as one thing, and he's going to appear to me as something completely different. So they finally make it to the bone carver's cell is. Feyre does mention that the hall continued down into the ageless dark. So there is more at the bottom. Foreshadowing. All right, so like the front gate when they came into the prison, this gate is also made of ivory, made out of bone. But this one has countless images: flora, fauna, seas, clouds, stars, and moons, infant skeletons, creatures, fair and foul. So it's kind of a very broad spectrum of the world. At least that's how I'm thinking of it. And now we meet the bone carver. So he is called the bone carver because he carves bones. He has carved every single gate and door in the prison from bones. And now we get a description of what Feyre sees. So she sees a boy who looked no more than 8, and she describes him a little bit more, but he is a child with blue eyes and dark hair. and about the age of 8. So someone she has not seen before. She does not recognize him. She's not able to put a name to him, just has a description of what he looks like. Reese throws a bone onto the floor towards the carver and says this is the bone that made the final kill when Feyre killed the Midgard worm. Feyre's just like, well, I never even thought that someone would think about that bone, but Rhysand is crafty. He thinks about these things in advance. And I underlined so much in this chapter because there's so much information, such good information. So the bone carver is surprised and says it has been an age since something new came into this world, talking about Feyre and her rebirth, her resurrection. And one of the things that she was told was to never lie to the bone carver because he knows. So the bone carver asks with the boy's face, "Are you frightened?" She says yes, because who wouldn't be? He kind of draws out her name and says it a couple of times, which if Feyre knew who he was portraying, like that's just heartbreaking to me for her to hear him say her name, but that's just me. I won't go into it yet. Okay, so then the bone carver wants to ask a bunch of questions in regards to Feyre, and Feyre has been told to say a question for a question, which the bone carver, of course, turns to Rhysand, and he's like, "You were always smarter than your forefathers." So he agrees and asks, "Tell me where you went, what you saw when you died." Those are the answers he wants to know, is what happened when she died. Rhys, of course, is a little wary in having her answer this because obviously it's a super traumatic thing that happened to her. But she does give some information.
I liked with the information that she was giving when she talks about there was the thread, there was the tether that she yanked on it. That felt reminiscent of what we had talked about early on, their bond, their, talking to going back to Reese being that one that said her name, the one that shouted her name
Exactly.
at the end. He is that one that can break through when nothing else.
Right? I agree. Well, Feyre starts out by saying, "I heard the crack when her neck broke." She says, "I heard the crack when she broke my neck. It was in my ears, but also inside my skull. I was gone before I felt anything more than the first lash of pain." And I want to point this out real quick because then the next line, the bone carver's violet eyes seem to glow brighter. And who's the only other person in the book with violet eyes? Rhysand. Ah! And she then goes on, "Then it was dark, a different sort of dark than this place, but there was a thread, like you mentioned, a tether. And I yanked on it, and suddenly I could see, not through my eyes, but through his, through Rhysand. I knew I was dead, and this tiny scrap of spirit was all that was left of me, clinging to the thread of our bargain." So, like you said, we talked earlier about the bargain that's holding them together. Obviously, is a lot more than that. And that's why her spirit was able to cling to it and pull herself back with that bond. And Feyre says there is only that bond in the darkness. And I'm glad that she describes Rhysand's face through all of this, because I think it's not something Feyre completely understands, is like the level of his devotion and feelings for her just yet, but you can see it clearly on his face. So, like, he is completely pale. He doesn't want her to have to relive this because he's also reliving it, but he's also learning a little bit more from her perspective of what happened and how truly broken she was at that point through all of this scene. So Feyre says there was light like swimming up through sparkling wine. All she wanted to do was return to the people around her. I wanted it badly enough I didn't have room for fear, because the bone carver asked if she was afraid. She says that the worst had happened and the darkness was calm and quiet. It did not seem like a bad thing to fade into it, but I wanted to go home. So I followed the bond home. I love that line. Not back to Tamlin, home. I followed the bond home. And who's at the other end of the bond? Rhysand. The bone carver is like, well, was there another world? Was there a light, a portal, anything like that? And Feyre almost asks where is it that you want to go? But instead, she turns around and says it was only peace and darkness. He asks if she had a body. She says no. And then Rhysand cuts him off from asking another question because they agreed to a question for a question. And at this point, the bone carver has asked 6 questions. So the bone carver is just like, well, you can't really blame me for asking questions because it's a rare day when I meet someone who comes back from true death, which makes me wonder, how often does he meet people that come back from not true death, and what is not true death? If she's the first one from true death that he's met. And he says, forgive me for wanting to peer behind the curtain, which I think is pretty cool as well. So then they get into why they're actually there. They want to know, can Jurian be resurrected? They don't bring up his name, but they ask, would there be a way to resurrect a person, to grow them a new body, and then put a soul in them? And he asks, was the soul contained? She says yes. He says, at first, there is no way. And then he's just like, well, actually. And then he goes into a little bit of a history lesson. So long ago, before the High Fae, before man, so this was all the way back at the beginning, there was the cauldron. They say all the magic was contained inside it, that the world was born in it, but it fell into the wrong hands, and great and horrible things were done with it. Great and horrible things. And here's going to be my next Throne of Glass reference, because we have similar discussion around the word keys, that you can do great and horrible things with them. So again, we have an object of great and terrible magic that in the right hands could do great things and in the wrong hands can do horrible things. He goes on to say things were forged with it. So it makes me wonder, was the cauldron, I just thought of this, was the cauldron initially with the Vogue, and the Vogue created the word keys with the cauldron so that they could walk between worlds?
And then left the cauldron in
Yeah.
a different world?
Yeah, I don't know, just spitballing here. But it said things were forged with it, such wicked things that the cauldron was eventually stolen back at great cost. I don't know. We'll talk more about those kinds of things when we get to Crescent City, because we learned some more about some other things that we can't get into yet. He does go on and say that the cauldron could not be destroyed. And we get a little foreshadowing here. It can't be destroyed. If you destroy it, it will essentially envelop the world. Like the world will die if you destroy the cauldron. For it had made all things, and if it were broken, then life would cease to be. So it was hidden and forgotten. Only with that cauldron could someone that is dead be reforged like that. Then he goes into a little more information on it, that the cauldron was hidden at the bottom of a frozen lake in Lapland, which we have no idea where that is. And then he says, but it vanished a long, long time ago. I don't know where it is or where it went to. Millennia before you were born, there were 3 feet on it, and they were successfully cleaved from its base in an attempt to fracture some of its power, at least a little bit. And it worked, but barely. And I love his analogy. He says it's like removing the first knuckle of a finger. It's irksome, but you could still use the rest with some difficulty. Like, such a terrible way to describe it, but pretty funny too. The feet were hidden in 3 different temples: Caesarea, Sangrava, and Ithaca. If they have gone missing, it's likely the cauldron is active once more, and that the wielder wants it at full power and not a wisp of it missing. So now we learn this is why the temples in the Night Court were attacked, because they held the 3 feet of the cauldron. Rhysand, of course, asks if the carver knows who has the cauldron, to which the carver responds, promise that you'll give me her bones when she dies, and I'll think about it. And Rhysand doesn't say or do anything at this point, but the boy then, the carver, laughs and says, no, I don't think even you would promise that. And then Rhysand gives him a warning look, like, don't you dare say anything else. Don't ruin the surprise. Stupid Rhysand. Anyway, the bone carver wants them to give up a little bit more of themselves before he answers more questions. So Feyre does go on a little bit more. She peels off another piece of herself to help them gain the information that they need. There was a choice in death. She says, I knew that I could drift away into the dark, and I chose to fight, to hold on for a bit longer. Yet I knew if I wanted to, I could have faded away, and maybe it would be a new world, a realm for rest and peace, but I wasn't ready for it, not to go there alone. I knew there was something else waiting beyond that dark, something good. So she is essentially saying there is more that I wanted to do, and I knew there was something better for me that I had not seen or experienced yet, and I didn't want to die until I could experience that. The Bone Carver pretty much says to Rhysand, you already know who has the cauldron. It's the King of Hybern. And then Feyre offers up an additional piece of herself in saying, when Amarantha made me kill those two fairies, if the third hadn't been Tamlin, I would have put the dagger in my own heart at the end. And Rhys goes completely still because he did not know it was quite that bad. She says, I knew there was no coming back from what I'd done. So Feyre goes on and said, once I broke their curse, once I knew I'd saved them, I just wanted enough time to turn that dagger on myself. I only decided I wanted to live when she killed me, and I knew I had not finished whatever it was I was born to do. And then she looks at Rhys, and he is absolutely devastated. Like, the look on his face is complete devastation because he realizes how close he came to actually losing her. And at this point, the Bone Carver says that the cauldron could do other things than raise the dead. It could shatter the wall, which we got a little foreshadowing in book 1 when Tamlin says that there might be other people in the fairy world, the Fey world, that might want to shatter the wall. And the Bone Carver goes on to say it's likely that Hybern has been quiet for so many years because he's been hunting for the cauldron and all of its pieces, putting it back together, learning all of its secrets, and then testing it out and finding that it is pure energy, pure power, and like any magic, it can be depleted. So he will let it rest, let it gather strength, and learn its secrets to feed it more energy, more power. He does go on to say that there is a way to stop it, that when the cauldron was made, its dark maker used the last of the molten ore to forge a book, the Book of Breathings. In it, written between the carved words, are the spells to negate the cauldron's power or control it wholly. But after the war, the book was split into two pieces. One went to the Fae in the Summer Court, where it's guarded and has tons of spells keyed to the High Lord of Summer. And then the other book was sent to the 6 human queens. It was all part of the treaty, even though it was just symbolic, because at that point, no one knew where the cauldron was, that it had been lost for a very long time, but that the human queens were very crafty. They were very crafty when they received their gift, their half of the book. They actually used Fae and wards from the Fae to actually bind the book so that if it was ever stolen, or if a High Lord were to ever winnow in, grab it, and leave, that the book would melt into ore and be lost. It must be freely given by a mortal queen with no trickery, no magic involved. And I love that he says, such clever, lovely creatures, humans. Because that's not the response that we get from most of the Fae in regards to humans. It's like, oh, they're small, they're puny. They live life to the fullest because their lifespan is so short. So it's a complete 180 from how the rest of the Fae view humans. He does say that if you reunite both halves of the Book of Breathings, you will be able to nullify the powers of the cauldron, hopefully before it returns to full strength and shatters the wall. So they both go to leave, and they're discussing what the Bone Carver looked like to each of them. This one is like heart shattering. The carver picks up the bone that Rhysand had brought him and weighed it in those child's hands. I shall carve your death in here, Feyre. And if we know who that person, who that boy is, he is literally carving her death, foreshadowing things that happen in A Court of Silver Flames. Anyway, they are heading back up, talking about what the Bone Carver looked like to them. Feyre says it was a boy around 8, dark-haired, blue-eyed. And Rhys shuddered. He knows who the boy was. Feyre doesn't yet, but Rhys knows. And to Rhysand, the Bone Carver looked just like Jurian. So the Bone Carver knew they were there to ask about Jurian the moment they walked in the door. So they get back to the house, and the inner circle is all there waiting for them to get the information from the Bone Carver. Rhysand gives them a rundown, doesn't tell them anything of what Feyre explained or what she gave, what she revealed. which I think just goes to show how much Rhysand values her. And I think it's interesting we get a little bit more understanding of the dynamic between the inner circle, because it's Cassian who's quiet, whereas he's usually the one talking. He doesn't stop talking. He is the quiet one, and the shadow singer, Azriel, is the one asking questions. And she thinks of it as if the general understood that Azriel would know when information was necessary, and so he let him do the talking or do the asking of the questions. We find out that, of course, Rhysand has sent a letter off to the Summer Court to try and get an audience with the High Lord of the Summer Court. He initially told us a couple chapters ago it was because of to enhance diplomatic relations. Really, it's because they want to go look for the book. They've assumed that Feyre, because she has a little bit of each of the High Lords in her, she essentially has 7 different fingerprints, one for each High Lord. And so their thought process is Feyre can find at least the part of the Book of Breathings that's in the Summer Court if it's keyed to the High Lord. So they decide that they're going to test Feyre. And I know I'm summarizing this chapter a ton, but there's a lot in the Weaver we need to get to. They're going to test out to see whether she can actually find something that's keyed to one of the High Lords. So the next thing they're going to go do is go talk to the Weaver. In part of this discussion, they're also talking about Hybern now having the cauldron. They've decided that since Hybern has come and entered the Night Court undetected and taken parts of the cauldron, sacked their temples, that it's an act of war. And so Rhysand is saying the Night Court is going to war with Hybern. So they're going to plan to go to Hybern to try and nullify the cauldron before any of that happens. So at this point, Rhysand and Feyre are going to go see the Weaver. Everybody else is going to stay and start planning their trip to Hybern.
And just real quick, Rhys did officially name her emissary to the Night Court for the human realm.
Oh, you're right. I forgot about that part. He tacks on that little detail as well, because they're going to need a base of operations in the human realm so that they can try and coax the human queens to come talk to them. So they are going to use Feyre's family's estate and try and get a meeting to happen there so that they're able to get to the second half of the book. So those are the 2 parts of his plan to get the Book of Breathings, but they need to test it out first. So they're going to go to the Weaver to see if Feyre can identify the object of mine in the Weaver's trove. So we get a little bit of information on the Weaver initially, but not a whole lot. So she is an ancient, wicked creature, Azriel says, who should remain unbothered. But Rhys is just like, whatever. And then he looks at Feyre and is like, okay, you get to choose. And Feyre's like, okay, let's go ahead and do it. The Bone Carver, the Weaver, can't you just call them by their actual names? So she's saying it as a joke, but Rhysand also knows that she's just so tired and drained for everything she went through in discussing everything in the prison that she is exhausted. And so she is showing no signs of fear. She has very little emotions in regards to the Weaver because she doesn't have any energy left.
Some of my
That way we
favorite
can-
lines are on these 2 pages
Which ones?
where she's thinking to herself, but she's saying where Rhys had once told Tamlin to bow, and now here he was on his knees
yes.
before me. I
That's my
love that.
favorite part. We're getting there. We're getting there. Okay. So the next morning, Rhysand barges into her room because he wants to be gone by first light. He wants to get moving, get to the Weaver, get it done, so he can move on to the next step. And this is where she has had another dream, but she didn't actually wake up and throw up. She actually made it through the whole night. So she says that her stomach was full because she didn't have to get up and throw up from it. At this point, he starts pulling clothes out for her. She's still in bed. So he's trying to pull things out to help her get ready faster, and ends up pulling out midnight lacy bits, her undergarments, and chuckling because he's like, I'm surprised you didn't demand for something else to be bought. And her response is, Rhysand, you're drooling on the carpet. I just love their banter back and forth. So he tells her that they're not taking any swords or bows or arrows. They're taking knives because the carver won't notice a knife. She has plenty of them in her cottage, but she will notice things that aren't currently in her cottage. So at this point, Rhys knelt in front of her. He spreads a holster for her to step into and helps buckle it all up while kneeling and sliding it up. So super sexy, and he's sliding up her thighs and buckling it. and she's not quite sure how to take it, but she thinks, like you said, she's referencing in her mind, she is thinking of the time that Rhysand once made Tamlin bow to him, and now here he was on his knees before me. His eyes glinted as if he remembered it too. Had that been part of his game, part of his facade? But his eyes are twinkling, of course, as he's kneeling in front of her because he knows exactly what she's thinking too. So he tells her that she can't make any sound, she can't touch anything but the object that she's there to get. If the bone carver wasn't lying, then the object will have the same imprint thanks to it being preserved by spells that he had placed on it a long time ago, because they are going to be one and the same, and that she will not notice Feyre's presence as long as Feyre only touches that object, because Feyre has that imprint of him as well. So she and the object should feel the same to the Weaver.
Which reminds me a little bit, going back to Disney callouts, the Cave of Wonders and Aladdin.
Right?
Smog liver.
I agree. But Feyre is smart and actually only touches the thing she's supposed to touch.
This is true.
Right? We get a little information on where the Weaver is. She's located in the section in the middle of Prythian that divides the solar courts from the seasonal courts. This is also where Under the Mountain is. So Feyre's a little leery in going back, but they're not actually going under the mountain because the Weaver dwells in the woods around the mountain. There is no High Lord that rules over the mountain. It is a section that is ruled essentially by the most powerful being in that area, whoever's at the top of the food chain. I love this part though. Before they go, she asks, "So I'm your huntress and your thief." And he says, "You are my salvation."
Swoon.
Right?
So good.
Exactly. I love it. All right, so Rhys winnows them into the wood. Feyre describes it as being older, more aware than any place I'd been. Feyre asks why Amarantha didn't wipe out this area. And Rhysand says, well, Amarantha was no fool. She did not touch the creatures or disturb the wood, even though he tried to get her to. And Feyre's response is, so she didn't disturb the wood, but now we're going to? For a mere test. And Rhysand is like, yeah, why not? And then he goes in to say, Cassian tried to convince me last night not to take you, that he thought Cassian may actually punch him in regards to it. And Feyre's like, well, why? Rhysand at this point is trying to keep her mind off of what she's about to do, and she's gonna realize it in a couple of minutes. But he next says, who knows, with Cassian he's probably more interested in sleeping with you than protecting you. And then he goes into saying, you could, if you wanted to, if you needed to move on from Tamlin in a physical manner, I'm sure he'd be happy to oblige. And so she's like, this felt like a test, so I'm just gonna piss him off because he's pissing me off. And she says, okay, tell him to come to my room tonight. And he's like, if you survive this test. And she's like, you seem a little too pleased at the prospect of that not happening. And he's like, oh no, quite the opposite, Feyre. But I will let Cassian know that you're open to his advances, which just cracks me up, the banter between the two of them. And then, as if he knows kind of what she was thinking, his response is like, did you enjoy the sight of me kneeling before you? Yes, Rhysand, we did. We loved it. It's almost as good as your throne scene in a couple of chapters, let's be honest.
So true. And then her right back at him, though, with the isn't that all males are good for anyway? Just right away.
I love it. Rhysand, she mentions then that, of course, they're walking a very dangerous line, that Rhys is forcing her to keep to walk it, to keep from thinking about what she's about to do, what she's about to face, as if he wants her to go in there mad, thinking about anything other than the Weaver, which works out nicely. He manages to do that probably a little too good, because she storms after him, and then that's when they come upon the whitewashed cottage. And Feyre mentioned, oh, this is like a little bit of cheese laid out for a mouse. Clearly is a trap. It's too perfect, too beautiful to be real. And I love this part. Love this section where she says, as she's creeping towards the cottage, she says, I avoided leaves and stones falling into a pattern of movement that some part of my body, some part that was not born high fae, remembered. So this is the first time since Under the Mountain that her body and herself are kind of remembering hunting as a human. I love that part. It was like waking up. That's what it felt like. So she's also in this kind of waking up to who she was before under the mountain and bringing a little bit of that back to her, as well as growing into who she's also become. She's kind of merging the two. She's trying to tell herself, I'm not a mouse, I'm a wolf. I can do this. Not going to back down, that kind of thing. So she steps into the cottage, and the weaver is in there, and she's singing. And we'll do a quick description of her. So she looks young, but she's actually super old. Her face, when we see it, is wrinkled, like eye holes. There aren't any eyes in them. They're like rotting, dark abysses. And her teeth are so like honed down because of how many things she has chewed, how many beans she has chewed. So from behind, she doesn't look creepy, but when you see the front of her, she is clearly super creepy. She looks young outside of her face, and her voice is nice and young and pretty. And she is singing a song, which I think is super interesting because a lot of times in storytelling, in history, even, I mean, even in songs nowadays, there is something behind the song, either history, legend, myth, or it's somebody's imaginings. So it makes me wonder, is this based on a true story or a legend or a myth, or is it just a made up song? So it is essentially two sisters have gone off playing. The older sister pushes the younger sister in and drowns her. Her corpse floats to the miller's dam. The miller takes her body out and uses parts of her body to create a viol, which is a violin. It just is a specific instrument from a certain time period. As the weaver is singing, Feyre is looking all around to find this one thing that Rhysand left. She notices that the weaver is using an ancient spinning wheel and that there's also a loom, and Feyre kind of reminisces, would she be singing if it was on weaving day versus on spinning day? So we go on in the song to hear that the miller used her breastbone to make the viol to play on, used her small fingers as pegs, used her nose ridge, like the bridge of your nose, for the bridge on the viol. And then this part makes me wonder. It says, what did he do with her veins so blue? So as a human, like outside on my skin, I can see blue veins. I know the blood is red, but on the outside it looks blue. So is it just referencing that in a human? Or is this daughter blue-blooded, like the witches in Throne of Glass? I don't know, but it made me wonder. So he uses her veins so blue as the strings for the viol. At this point, Feyre has looked around a little bit more in the cottage. She has discovered that the bolts of fabric that the weaver has woven together are drenched in fear. So they're clearly woven of something, someone, because of how fear drenched. So this is where I say Rhysand did a really great job of distracting her before they got to the Weaver, but I think it almost got to a point where it went too far because now she's thinking about it while in the Weaver's house and not focusing on the task. Because at this point, she's thinking Rhysand had sent her in for a fool's errand. Maybe there was nothing there. Maybe he was just getting her body to react to something or trying to figure out what her body react to. And her response to that is kind of, well, maybe I've come to a point where I resent Tamlin so much that in the moment I enjoyed that bit of flirtation. Maybe it made me a monster as much as the female spinning before me. And okay, this is what my like fifth or sixth Throne of Glass reference. Then she says, but if I was a monster, then I suppose Rhysand was as well. And Aelin thinks of herself in the same manner as a monster, that she will do anything and become anything she needs to be to protect the people she loves. So I feel like Rhysand and Aelin are so similar. Like they are male and female versions of each other to an extent. Because I also love in Throne of Glass, Rowan's response to her saying is, if you're a monster, I'm a monster. So it's the same for both of them. I love it. And that's where Feyre says, Rhysand and I were one and the same. Beyond the power that he'd given me, it'd be fitting if Tamlin hated me too once he realized I truly left. And then it's finally at that point that she remembers, oh crap, I'm supposed to be looking for something. And that thing is kind of like, hello, I'm over here. The weaver continues singing that the miller used her eyes to set at first light, but then the tongue so roughed was used as a till, and it spoke. So essentially, the vial is speaking because it's made out of human parts. Feyre has found a ring, twisted strands of gold and silver flecked with pearl and set with a stone of deepest solid blue, sapphire but different. And she could have sworn there was a 6-pointed star radiated across the round opaque surface. And she says, and this had Reese written all over it. So then the weaver sings. The miller started playing the instrument, and it spoke of the daughter's father being the king. And then the miller plucks the second string, and it talks about the mother, the queen. Again, gets caught up in her thoughts and isn't focusing on the task and thinks, once I get back to Rhysand, I'm going to stab him, and then oh crap, now that's reminded me of all the crap that I did to get to where I am. And then she like falls into a little panic attack. She pulls herself back out of it, shuts the thoughts down. And the weaver said, or the last couple of lines in the song, then he strummed all 3 strings. Yonder is my sister that drowned me. Feyre grabs the ring and plucks it off the shelf, and the weaver stops singing. 21. Weaver grabs the spinning wheel, and the second that it stops spinning, the doors and the windows slam shut. There is no way out. There's no latch on the door or the windows. There's no way for Feyre to open either of them. And at this point, she finally feels fear. It slammed into me, and I remembered what it was to be human and helpless and weak. And I remembered what it was to want to fight to live and to be willing to do anything to stay breathing. So it's like she's finally waking up and remembering what it was like when she was hunting in the woods so that they didn't starve. She's just like, well, it doesn't matter if I'm a mouse or a wolf. In either way, I am caged or I am trapped and cornered. So Feyre chooses to fight. The weaver is trying to figure out where she is because the weaver is blind. She says, what is like all and unlike all. Excuse me. At that point, Feyre grabs a candle, a burning candle, throws it at the bolts of fabric, the woven bodies, skins, lives, let them be free. And then the weaver starts screaming. The only place that Feyre has to go to try to escape is up the chimney. So in the fireplace, which is thankfully not burning. So she gets there and it's brick and it smells terrible. It reeks like carrion and burned hair. I hate the smell of burned hair. Like, I think that's one of the worst things. There was an oily sheen on the stone, like cooked fat. And then Feyre doesn't finish that thought because she's like, okay, that's cooked people. She starts climbing up, and then she realizes that the weaver has also come up into the fireplace to try and climb up after her. And she kind of has a panic attack. Again, she is not sure. At this point, she's not sure she's going to be able to make it out. She's in a closed, confined space, which she's clearly had issues with since being under the mountain and being in a cell. So she is having a panic attack, isn't able to think about what to do, how to move past it, and actually get herself out. And she is essentially stuck in the chimney. But I love that it says the word stop. The word came out of the darkness of my mind. The voice was my own, and it said stop, breathe, think. So I think, like I debated, is this Rhysand in her head trying to get her to do it? And I don't think that's the case. I think that because Rhysand has started to help her overcome her issues, when she was having a panic attack, he was telling her to stop. So I think that because he's started to help her heal, she is now able to start doing it herself. So she gets to a point where she is able to stop the bad thoughts, stop the panic attack, and realizes that she is strong. She has the strength now. I was not a pet, not a doll, not an animal. I was a survivor and I was strong. I would not be weak or helpless again. I could not be broken or tamed. Which I
Yes.
think is a huge, huge quote. Everybody loves that quote. Could not be tamed. Thank you, Miley Cyrus, as well. So at that point, she's like, I'm going to push through it. So she starts pushing herself up and out of the chimney. Also, she's slamming her fist into one of the bricks to loosen it up. When she grabs it, she is able to throw it, and it smacks the weaver in the nose. She hears bone crunching, lovely sounds. She ends up getting up the chimney, and this is the next part where I'm going to reference Throne of Glass, because she mentions as she's climbing up that her skin was tearing and her nails were chipping because she was grabbing so hard. And we get very similar wording when Selena, at that point, because it's in book 1 of Throne of Glass, is climbing the castle in one of their tests to be able to get to the flag at the top. Very similar wording in how their climbing is described. But she makes it up onto the roof. At this point, the weaver comes out the door, so Feyre thinks, okay, I need to go up into a tree. I can't go out. I can't go to the ground because that's where the weaver is. So she's like, I imagine her kind of crawling, kind of tripping and falling across the roof and realizing that it's not thatched with hay, it is thatched with hair. And
Ugh.
like,
The
yeah,
visuals
this
in
was
this,
bad.
y'all know I don't have a queasy stomach, but as I mentioned to you earlier, this paragraph took a lot out of me.
Yeah, the hair, like I feel like I could deal with all the other stuff because it's not stuff that I've ever dealt with before, so I can't relate to it. But the hair on her body sticking to her, like I can't stand that. If there's a hair touching the back of my arm, I have to get it. Nope. I won't even I don't sleep with my hair down. It has to be above my head because I can't stand it on the back of my neck. So I understand. This would be my worst nightmare. Being covered in oil and then hair.
Yes.
Oh,
And
yeah.
being sticky and then hairy. Like, no.
Gosh.
It's like getting out of the beach with wet shoes and then walking on the dry sand. It's same.
Yes, it's just terrible. And on top of that, like if it's my hair, that's one thing, but it is other people's hair.
I mean, who
People
knows
she
how
has
old
no
they
idea
are.
who they are, right? Or how clean they were. Like when was the last time all this hair was washed? And oh yeah, no, just
Yeah.
nope. Can't do it. But yes, this is a very descriptive set of paragraphs. And she does end up climbing up onto a tree branch, running through the trees. Eventually, she does get to Rhysand, and he's like, what on earth did you do? Because the Weaver is screaming like bloody murder. And Feyre is so pissed off at him. She is like about to scream him, cuss him out, and he's like, nope, hold on. Don't do it yet. And then he winnows them. And I think again, this is where the flying comes in. I love it because he just grabs her and they free fell. I didn't have breath to scream as his wings appeared, spreading wide, and he curved us into a steady glide right through the open windows of what had to be a war room. So he has winnowed them, flown them into the House of Wind and the war room where Cassian is arguing with Amren. And I love Amren's response. You smell like barbecue. Just yummy. Oh gosh, yummy.
And of course, she had to mention the boiled fat that she's covered in. Just, 'cause
Right?
it's already bad enough that we know it's Grace, but then we knew it alluded to boiled fat. We didn't need to read the words boiled fat italicized just to
Exactly.
hammer it home.
And she says the hair clinging to me scratched and tickled,
Tickle.
which is the worst feeling in the world. And Rhys is like, well, I don't know what happened, but the Weaver was screaming, and I'm dying to know what Feyre darling did. Because he loves to throw out that term of endearment whenever he chooses to, when it's least convenient for everybody else. She vomits all over the floor because, yeah, she can't. I would have vomited already at that point. There would be nothing left in my stomach. And then Amren just waves her hand, and the vomit and all of the oil on her skin and the hair is all gone. She can still feel like the phantom of it because she hasn't officially bathed, but at least it is not physically on her anymore. Then we learn that Rhysand is also ruthless. I mean, we knew he was, but he is kind of ruthless in this part as well because he says he wasn't going to come help her because he wanted her to be able to do it on her own. He wanted her to overcome that fear and that like debilitating reaction to a bad circumstance. He wanted her to get to a point where she could overcome it on her own. And he saw this as kind of a controlled environment to an extent. I mean, it's the Weaver, and she could easily kill a bunch of people, but yeah. And Farrah's a little annoyed because she went through all of this just to get a ring, a stupid ring. And then she's like, but you didn't make me get it just to test my abilities and get your ring back. You did it so that I could master my panic. Cassian is like, oh crap, I didn't even think of that. Amren's like, well, that's brutal, but effective, because again, Amren will do whatever she has to do as well. And Rhysand is like, you know what? Don't judge me because you would have done the same. And Cassian's like, yeah, okay, you're right. Because again, they will all do whatever they need to survive and make it work. Farrah is like, I don't want to feel like that again. I felt like it my whole life as a human, and I don't want to get to that point where I feel like I am unable to help myself. So she tells Cassian that she wants to train with him in regards to fighting. I love his response. His response is, okay, you're going to be calling me a prick. You're going to hate me, which is understandable. He says, I don't know anything about training humans, how breakable your bodies are or were. But we'll figure it out. I do love that Cassian agrees, and Farrah even points out that he didn't even bother to look at Rhysand for confirmation or approval because she is so used to having to look to Tamlin or Ianthe for approval, and no one does that in this court. They choose what they want to do, and it's their decision. Yes, Rhysand as the High Lord might ask them to do something, but it's their choice whether they agree or not. And this is Cassian's choice to agree and Farrah's choice to ask. And she specifically says, I don't want to have to wait for anyone to rescue me, which is exactly what happened when Tamlin trapped her in the house. She had to wait for Mora to rescue her, and she doesn't want to ever feel that way again. And then we get a little information on the ring that she has come to get, and there's more to it that we don't know of yet. It was Rhysand's mom's ring. She gave it to him when he was young and then took it back when he became of age, and she put it with the Weaver for safekeeping. And Rhysand says the reason she did that is so that he wouldn't waste it. So pretty much so he wouldn't give it to the wrong person to become his partner. Farrah is just like nonsense and idiocy, and I just want a bath. Go away because I want a bath. This is the other flying part that I love. Rhysand realizes that she's done. She's had it. She needs a bath. She can't take anymore. So he again just like grabs her, and they just fall out a window. They free fell for 5 thunderous, wild heartbeats before he winnowed directly into my bedroom in the townhouse. And he already has water running in the bath. And he asks her, what about training your other gifts? And she says, well, I'm pretty sure you and I would shred each other to pieces. And he says, oh, most definitely. That's going to be the best part of it. But we're going to consider it now a requirement. One of your work requirements is training with me on your other gifts, your magic. And then he tries to get her to get past his shields to train her magic. And she's like, I'm too tired. I need a bath. And if we do this, the bath will be cold by the time we get there. And he's like, no, don't worry about it. I'll handle the bath. Or, you can master your powers enough and then you could heat the bath. We'll get to that. And then he's like, your power, you can feel it stalking under your skin, purring in your ear. And she says, well, so what if I do? And he says, I'm surprised Ianthe didn't carve you up on an altar to see what that power looks like. And we get a little bit of information on the high priestesses that Rhysand doesn't have a ton of respect for most of them. Some of them he does because he says that they're actually high priestesses. They're actually there, to help the people. They're compassionate, that kind of thing. But quite a few of them, especially Ianthe, are not. They're conniving, and they have burrowed their ways into certain courts. And I took note of this just because I want to pay attention to it in the future, because I don't remember any other priestesses mentioned in any of the courts that they go to visit or any times that they're talking with the other high lords of those courts. But he says that the high priestesses have burrowed into day, dawn, and winter courts mostly. And they've entrenched themselves so thoroughly that their spies are everywhere and their followers are near fanatics with devotion. And yet, during the 50 years under the mountain, all of the priestesses disappeared. They escaped. So it makes me wonder, one, how did that happen? How did they escape during those 50 years? But two, is it because the blight only focused on those with magic? And although Tamlin said Ianthe is powerful, we never actually see any magic from her, like at any part. So is it because the high priestesses don't have magic in the same way that the High Lords do and the rest of the Fae do, and that's why they were able to escape. I don't know, but I think it's an interesting tidbit that the High Priestesses, not just Dianthe, but all of them were able to escape Amarantha's wrath. And he says, I would not be surprised if Dianthe sought to establish a foothold in the Spring Court. So that way, the High Priestesses would have a foothold in 4 of the 7 High Courts. So that's a majority. Rhysand pushes Feyre to try and get past his guards. He won't tell her why he doesn't like Ianthe. He wants to show her. So she tries but doesn't do a good enough job. But she does go into his mind because he lets her. And we see a memory of 100 years ago where Ianthe had come to the Night Court in the Hewn City in the Court of Nightmares. And he tried to seduce Rhysand. He finds her naked in his bed. That she wants to join him because she thinks that the offspring from the two of them would be very powerful. So again, we see where Ianthe is focused on offspring and not necessarily on anything else. So in the memory, he's debating killing her. He, says Azrael had left the court because he couldn't take it anymore. The other males, were upset because she was hounding them, stalking them. More was about one more comment away from snapping her neck, and she tells him that her allegiance lies with the future of Prythian, with the true power in this land, which we know is Rhysand because he's the most powerful High Lord in all of Prythian. So that's when she says that their offspring would be incredible. She tries to move her body in a way to entice him into coming to bed with her. And instead, he ends up holding her to the bed with his power so that she can't move. And he tells her she needs to leave not just his bed and his bedroom, but she needs to leave the court because he's not interested. So she gets up, doesn't pick her clothes up, walks towards him, and goes to grab him in his no-no square. Just gonna throw it out there in his no square. But his power lashes out around her fingers before she could grab him. He crunched the power down, twisting. So essentially he is like crushing, shattering her hand, which I think is also a little foreshadowing. But probably only why it happens because of this memory. But anyway, he snaps bones and tendons. He tells her, your hand will heal, but if I hear you touch anyone else in my court, I will do the same thing to your body and then it won't heal. So she leaves and tells him that you'll regret this. And I think it's interesting. I want to mention it before we jump back to the last little piece of this chapter. But I think it's interesting that we've now seen Ianthe 100 years ago going to the Night Court because she says Rhysand is the most powerful in Prythian and she wants to align herself with him, probably because she wants to have his children so that she has a tie to that power and that social standing, but he doesn't give it to her. So it makes me wonder, they don't mention her being at the Spring Court at any point prior to when Tamlin invites her after onto the mountain. Like it even goes so far as to say that he invited her to fix and repair the temple that's on the Spring Court grounds. So it makes me believe, based on that she wasn't there prior and that she didn't come until Feyre was there. So it makes me wonder, is Ianthe just seeking out the next most powerful being in Prythian, being Feyre? Only Feyre's a girl and Ianthe can't have her babies. So she's like, well, then I'm just going to become friends with her, make her rely on me so that I become an integral part of her world and she doesn't want me to leave. So is she just trying to find the next best thing? I don't know. At that point, Rhysand lets Feyre out of his mind. And of course, Rhysand doesn't do anything without a little bit of a lesson to help Feyre learn through everything. He's rule 1, don't go into someone's mind unless you hold a way out. That other Damati might leave their minds open. And if you go in, they might keep you in there and be able to control you from there. Well, he starts to go into rule 2, which is be prepared to things you might not like. But before he can say that, she says, when was that? And 100 years ago. And then she starts to say she didn't act that way in the Spring Court. But then she pauses and remembered how much Lucian hated her and how much he made vague, vicious allusions to not liking her or being approached by her. So I think it's pretty safe to assume that maybe Lucian hasn't done anything with her, but that he's felt the same thing that Rhysand and his court felt when she was there. And she wonders if there's anything she could do if she went back to the Spring Court to convince Tamlin to dismiss her. And then she starts to think, what if now that I'm gone, she's actually with Tamlin, but she cuts off that thought as well because Rhys interrupts her and tells her what Rule 2 is. And then she turns around and thinks that there was only 50 years between the time that happened with Ianthe and the time Amarantha came, and essentially that Rhysand had done exactly the same thing that Ianthe had tried to do, that he let himself be pursued by Amarantha, whereas he would have killed Ianthe for it, all to keep his family safe. And I love the end of this chapter because she says finally she does get to go into the bath, and the bath is hot, just as he promised. But I mulled over what he'd shown me, seeing that hand again, reaching between his legs, the ownership and arrogance in that gesture. Then she shuts out the memory and instantly the bath is cold. I think because she got so frustrated from seeing the memory that she turned to ice or spread ice out, and that's what made the bath cold. And that's the end of chapter 21. Right? Oh my gosh. So much. Definitely Rhysand kneeling in front of Feyre is my favorite part in all of those chapters, but I do like the bone carver and all of the information that he gave us. Thanks for joining us again for episode 8, our deep dive into A Court of Mist and Fury, chapters 17 through 22. Thanks so much for hanging out with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and come back next time as we dive a little bit further into our favorite fantasy novel. Until then, happy reading. And may your TBR never stop growing, because I know mine never does. So that's it for episode 8 of Just Read It, okay?